Is Valentine Ohu, and it's my pleasure to welcome every one of you to the fourth part of this conference. It's a conference of a kind. I'm very passionate about education because I keep learning every day as a radio host. My primary job is a breakfast show host on radio, and Valentine Ohu was fortunate enough to be called upon to compare this event by Mr. Annie, and I'm really grateful to have this opportunity to meet every one of you and learn from your wealth of experience. Today's conference on disruption and innovation, reshaping education in Africa post-COVID-19, part 4 of this is going to be focused on partnerships, the way forward, partnerships, collaboration, and community engagement. For today's conference, Dan is the head of growth at 100, which is an existing foundations with governments, with passionate kids on time last year. Before that, he founded a predictive learning assessment or hiring assessment company and spent many years at high growth tech companies in San Francisco. Danny is one of them. There's another person that I was looking forward to meeting last week. I'm glad that the person is here today, Loide Shanika. Loide Shanika happens to be a teacher. She's had teaching experience, teacher by professional experience of 40 years. Loide is currently the Secretary General of Namibia National NANTU. And there's also the wonderful gentleman that joined us last week. He's here today, Mr. Frank Lukiamuzi. I'm looking forward to hearing from you, Frank. Mr. Frank has 29 years of teaching experience in Uganda and currently the Executive Secretary of the Wakiso Education Consults, Kampala, Uganda. And then we'll get to the other panelists who needs no mention, but he's our moderator and host for today's conference, Mr. Charles Basi Ayo. Annie Charles Basi-Ayo is a fellow chartered accountant, certified corporate treasurer. He's currently an active entrepreneur and education strategist, someone that's very passionate. He takes it upon his shoulders to make sure that Africa's education in Africa just has a new look and face. He's the co-founder of Axiom Learning Solutions and currently the principal and board executive of the Lani Group, which comprises of investment holdings. Annie and Axiom Learning Solutions facilitated this event and made it possible. The other people that I can't go further without mentioning are people who have been key supporters and key partners. Our main strategic partner for this conference since it started is eLearning Africa, and they've been very supportive to making this a great success. Also special thanks to Rebecca Stromeyer. She's the founder of eLearning Africa. She's been very instrumental, I hear, to making sure that this is very successful. Special thanks also to the Africa Education Watch. Africa Education Watch is from Ghana. And also not forgetting MTN Nigeria. How can I forget MTN Nigeria? Our tech supporters and partners for this event. As a disclaimer, I've been asked to remind you that none of what you're going to hear today, everything that you hear, the views, the opinions, the comments on in this conference does not represent the views and opinions or standpoints of Axiom Learning Solutions. We're here to just receive all the knowledge that we can to reshape the way learning and education is carried on in Africa post-COVID-19. Also remember that as part of this conference, if you're participating via Zoom, this is a very interesting app. It has most of the functions at the bottom panel of the screen. So if you go to the bottom, you see the Q&A section, you see the other section for you to leave a comment. All the questions should be directed on the Q&A platform, and any comments you have should be shared on the comment section so that we can clearly define what is what and attend to which as fast as possible. And you can use the hand raise feature as well if you're feeling tech savvy. And to make it more interesting, please use it. As soon as I'm done, I'll hand over to Annie. But before Annie steps in, there'll be questions. There's a poll that I've already set up to aid the direction of this conversation. So the poll will pop up in the screen shortly. So feel free to answer. Panelists are excluded from this session. Every attendee at this event should please feel free just answer the question you have all through the session, to attend to these questions and be as honest as possible. All right, so that's for me, Valentine. I'll hand over to Mr. Annie to take over the moderation from here. Mr. Annie? Also, before I forget, please, if anybody wants to speak, remember to unmute your mic. And when you're done speaking, please mute your mic. It's at the bottom left corner of the screen as well. Annie, please. I can't hear you. Can anybody else hear Annie? Okay, Annie, there's an issue with your mic. I suggest you.
Can you hear me now?
Perfect.
Perfect, excellent. So apologies for that. It's being agile and being in the post-COVID world. So it's been interesting. We've had 3 weeks of very interesting conversations. We started with policy and leadership on the first week. And one of the things that came out of that was that in a pandemic, or even before we have a pandemic, we must have education-wide preparedness programs. The second week, we spoke about technology and innovation. And I think one of the things that really came out of that was that things such as radio was very effective in rural and remote areas. We heard about radio being used in remote areas like Australia, Hawaii Islands in the 60s and the 70s. And we find that radio does have a role to play in all this connection. We also touched on innovation, and being that innovation was something, I think the word was, it's a disruption. You have 2 things to do, either wait and watch, or you do something about it. And last week, we touched on a wonderful thing about teaching and learning practices and how that's going to evolve post-COVID. And it was very interesting again that we got this really nice phrase come out of that our teachers need to be inspired. And we took that on board as very innovative and public reformers. And we have something to talk to you about later on in the program about how we feel teachers can be inspired. And, in everything we do, the most important thing is that we should collaborate. The world is not an ecosystem where we continue to work in silos, but we need to come together and work together to make things happen. And that is very much part of Goal 17 of the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. We need to celebrate partnerships. We need to celebrate how to collaborate. But when it comes to education, oftentimes there's a bit of a disconnect. We find on one hand, we have people who are so passionate about education. They're co-educators, they want to make real change and reform. And then on the other hand, you have people who are tech and probably investors in the sector, and they're very good about the business of education. We need to come together. We need to come together that the business of education is more streamlined, effective, and produces what we need to see, the learning outcomes, the teaching outcomes. That is very important. We can't leave that behind. And that brings us to today. I was chatting with when we're creating this program, and she was so vehement. She's actually one of the international broadcasters at Al Jazeera. And her comment was that, let's make sure we don't just have a conference that is a talk shop, but a conference that at the end of it all, you could see what we have done. And I think that is really where we are ending up today. We have here beautiful panelists, all of them renowned in their own rights in what they've done, and not just coming to talk, but coming to tell us how they see partnerships, collaborations, engagement post-COVID. I want us to think about the ecosystem, that we're educators, we are parents, we are advocates, policymakers, we're government, we're service providers, we're technology. That's very important. So it's not about one winning, it's about a win-win solution. So we're going to travel around the world. We'll probably start off in Helsinki with Danny. and then probably end up in Kampala with Frank, and then find my way on a very interesting terrain across Southern Africa to end up in Windhoek, where we'll speak to Lloyde. And with all that, we'll end up back in Lagos, and then we'll have polls, a lot of engagement, a lot of contributions and questions. So over to you, Danny. Danny, can I have you unmute your mic now?
Yes, thank you, Ani.
So we both have a beard. Is that a beard because of lockdown? Because I have a very full beard, and I really couldn't stomach it anymore. I had to get it shaved. So I had to have the barber come into the house, and the sort of protocols that I administered over the poor barber was quite amusing. But, you know, it's again that we need to be agile and responsive to the needs of our environment. Things like simple as a haircut. And we're looking at the easing restrictions all around the world. Perhaps you could just talk us, before you start your presentation, how is it in Helsinki this, it's still morning in Helsinki. How is it in Helsinki today?
Well, it's approaching evening over here, but we actually had a little bit of snow yesterday, if you can believe that. So things are, the weather isn't really keeping up with the times, but the government is in discussions about, it looks like schools are going to reopen next week, at least for the last couple weeks of the year, and going to start easing restrictions on restaurants and outdoor facilities and some events. So starting to test the waters on coming out of shelter in place. And I think by and large, you know, given the Nordic population and their kind of adherence to rules, I think it's gone really well here, and we feel very fortunate. But it will be interesting to see what happens over the summer, you know, as countries asynchronously open up throughout Europe.
Yeah, and I think later in the call when we have Lloyde from Windhoek is the capital of Namibia, they have started the process of integrating schools. And it would be interesting to hear from her. They had less incident. They don't had an incidence of COVID, I think, over the last 9 weeks. So that's quite, we'd like to hear from her and how that impacts on education. Before you start your presentation, just tell me, what do you do at 100? You know, we all have all these titles, but what do you actually do at 100?
Actually manage our partnerships. So very topical for this conversation, but we work with, you know, very large organizations like Lego Foundation and the OECD, all the way to, you know, small regional partners throughout the world, both as members of our community, but also project partners for our various types of projects, including our spotlights.
Okay, so it's over to you. You got to tell us how to do it. And what I want you to bear in mind is that a lot of times people do not know how to partner. People do not know how to engage. And, you know, particularly at a corporate level, the wonderful solutions, wonderful innovation, and people just don't know how to go about it. So you need to sort that out. Over to you now. Thank you.
Perfect. I will share my screen so you can see. Let me see if, sorry, well, I updated Zoom, so I don't know if I'm going to be able to do that. But I will talk through.
I did today. So go to the bottom, I think the middle section, the bottom of the screen.
Maybe this will work.
Screen
Oh, there we go. Did that? Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So yes, as mentioned, my name is Danny Galland. I work for 100 as the head of growth/partnerships based out of Helsinki. So 100 improves education through impactful innovations. I will get into what exactly that means in a little bit. We believe that the purpose of education is to help every child flourish in life, no matter what happens. And our theory of change revolves around us believing that innovations are the path to change in education. So there's a lot of comments and conversation around the world that education is slow, it's not changing, things need to move faster. And while we agree by and large that they should move faster, we also believe that there are amazing things happening in education all over the world. And if we can identify and help them spread, we can help impact change much more quickly. So as I said, everything we do starts with the child in mind. So it's the center of all of our work. The first and primary thing that we do is identify innovations. So we have researched over 5,000 in just the last 3 years since we started. We have a series of different collections, we call them, but basically ways that we feature these innovations in education. And we have a global academy of various education stakeholders from all around the world that select these innovations for impact and scalability. The second is to change the tone. So as I mentioned, change is already happening. We believe it, we see it all over the world. So we are a central place for all the stories around education innovations and what's already happening in stories of success. And then we're also, becoming a global brand ourselves, and drove over 1 million visits to innovation pages on our site just last year alone. The third component of our theory of change is how do we help innovations, particularly very tactfully helping them, or tactically helping them spread. So we have a community of innovators, obviously helping each other, sharing stories, helping connect the dots across boundaries, both globally and in specific countries and contexts. And then we also provide a space called our Connect platform that allows them to make specific requests on how to grow. And then finally, we've started to curate a set of funders in education from around the world, and then what areas and types of funding that they provide. And then I am actively pursuing conversations and relationships with these funders to try to connect the dots and make more money flow into education globally. Finally, we have our Plus part of the organization, which I manage as well. And that's really about co-developing solutions with education providers around the world. So we help understand their needs and challenges, and then based on our relationships and our understanding of innovations, we help connect the dots and create custom solutions for educators. So as you might imagine, there's a lot of different partnerships that are involved in all those different parts of the business. Just to give you a sense of our global scale, we have selected innovations in over 100 countries. We have ambassadors in over 80 countries. So a very broad reach. You can see a lot of white space in Africa, which I'll get to a little bit later. One example out of Africa actually is called Speed School. Many of you may be aware of it, but they're one of our innovators. Alameyu spoke at our summit this last year. It's very close to us, and was one of our favorite innovations, just in their ability to really make change happen for so many children every year for the last 10 years. A brief snapshot of our impact. So as I mentioned, almost 1 million views last year alone. We have over 1,000 innovations that have created their own innovation page and submitted for the review process for one project or another. And those innovations impact almost 200 million children each year. Just to give it a little more in-depth view of what our educator process looks like. We really believe that to make change happen and sustainably and continue to innovate in education systems, you really need to understand the need in the system or the goal that they're trying to solve, work on a co-implementation plan, and then ensure that a sustainable funding model is created to ensure that that innovation stays active over time and the impact is long-lasting and sustainable. To focus on partnerships for a second. So we have partnerships, as I mentioned, from very large organizations to very small ones. And regardless, the first and most important thing is just clear alignment of our vision and goals, ideally as an organization, but certainly for the project at hand. And this is to say, you can't really force another organization to care about something as much as you do. And if there's not alignment from the outset, something will undeniably go wrong, and eventually things will start to fall off the rails. So make sure that you ask some maybe uncomfortable questions to make sure that there's nothing either side is hiding, and you're very clear on what everyone wants to get out of the project. The second, and related to how that process goes, is the power dynamics. So, for us, for example, a conversation with the World Bank that I was having today, they're a massive organization. They're able to work with governments all over the world, but at the same time, that makes them a little bit more slow moving. So the power dynamic is they're much larger, they have a lot more money and influence, and it is beneficial for us to be working with them and have that brand association. But on the flip side, we're able to move faster, we're able to get things done, and we can get a ground level feedback on what's going on, especially during COVID. So understanding that we both have things to bring to the table. And even if you are a smaller organization, there's always something mutually beneficial about a partnership. Otherwise, it wouldn't be called a partnership. The third is to be protective of yourself, your work, whatever intellectual property you've created, but also flexible with whatever terms of the contract. And I guess the first step of that would be, ensure you have a contract in place that protects both sides in the event that something goes wrong or doesn't go as planned. You want to make sure that you're not financially exposed, but also, holding each other accountable to all the right components of the project to make it successful. Which leads me to my next point, which is all the responsibilities and goals for each side should be clearly laid out, and the respective owners on each side of the project should be very clear. Because if this is out of sync going into the project, it's really hard to recover and ask things of people that you weren't clear on up front. Sometimes the organization will react and they'll be open to it, but other times it can be really hard and you risk missing deadlines. And that is the last point, which is, ensuring that all the work that you have has specific deadlines and that you have advanced check-ins to make sure that everyone is on pace to hit the goals of the project. So it shouldn't be any surprise then that our onboarding process for partners is basically a result of those learnings. So the first is really being clear on what the goals are with the partner and for the project, and then what our timelines are for delivery, starting with the end goal and then working our way backwards from there. Then we work through the contract terms and negotiate what those actually look like and work through any legal processes we might need. The third is that clear roles and responsibilities meeting. So I bring in 3 or 4 folks from my team and then ask the partner to do the same. And then we talk through all the responsibilities and who's accountable for what. And then we have those individual meetings with all those same folks, one-on-one with our media person and their media person, for example. And then finally, we'll have that first check-in meeting, maybe a month or 2 down the line, to ensure that everything is pacing as planned. Everyone's clear on what's going on and there's no friction in the process. And then we're off and running. So for us, as you saw those 4 areas before, the key strategic partnerships are first identifying innovations. So we call these spotlights, and these can be from, anywhere from a country or a small country or a city to a theme like creativity, for example, that we have a spotlight with the Lego Foundation right now globally on creativity innovations. And that's to broaden our spread, focus on specific themes that we find are either important or emerging themes in education. And that's a great way for us to get a good brand partner, but also, expand our reach and grow our community. The second is in promoting innovation. So obviously, we have some global brand recognition, but this spreads much more rapidly with local partners that already have strong brands in education or corporations that we partner with that have strong global or local brands as well. So those brand associations are very helpful, and they also help spread our invitation for innovations, invitation to become ambassadors, and obviously Hundreds brand locally around the world. And then the third is in line with that. So these brand partnerships. So Supercell is one of our main global partners. Obviously, that's very helpful because they're a very globally recognized brand with hundreds of millions of players around the world. And then things like OECD, very well known with governments, the Lego Foundation, very well known with children. So we try to get brand partnerships that are going to help increase awareness. And then finally is helping innovations actually spread and grow. So whether it's in schools, through governments and education, so the World Bank partnership and OECD is helpful for that. And then making sure that we're actually helping innovation spread, which is the ultimate goal to change innovation in the long term. In terms of Africa, I mentioned this earlier, but unfortunately, it's one of the areas we're least represented. Partly, I think, obviously, the internet access has a pretty big impact on that, and we're very limited to where we can reach people who are teachers that are innovating specifically through the internet. But at the same time, our ambassadors are a really key part of that. So we'd really like to get more ambassadors from Africa in general, especially given we're lagging behind the share of the population of the world there. Innovations, we're very far behind where we'd like to be, and we know the innovations are out there and they're happening, and we're really interested in partnerships and spotlights and ambassadors to help us understand more of what's going on in Africa and share it with the world. And as you can see there, only 14 of the countries in Africa we have any ambassadors in, which is a shame. So this is one of our priorities for this year, actually, and something we could use all of your help with. Finally, why partnerships are important. They help align organizations to accomplish more together. So as I mentioned with that World Bank analogy earlier, or example, I should say, there's something we both benefit from that partnership, and it's a lot faster and easier than trying to hire or do all those functions ourselves. So there's a lot of mutually beneficial elements to partnering together. And that's one thing I should mention as well, is even if there are much bigger organizations, don't forget that there's a lot of value that you bring, and there's a mutually beneficial conversation there, and a mutually beneficial partnership for you. The second is the ability to increase your effectiveness. So, other organizations have expertise that we don't have. They have brand. They have things that we don't want to invest in or develop, but they can deploy them really quickly once we get a partnership going. So it's worth that effort from our end. Thirdly is, new contexts and geographies. As I mentioned, organizations, companies that have a strong presence in an area, these are able to allow any organization to spread much more quickly, where you align in those areas. So always easier to do it that way than try to expand yourself. Fourth is for smaller organizations, getting that broader recognition is great. And it is very difficult, again, to build that yourself. And then finally, and one of the ones we hear from our innovators a lot is it's a milestone and very validating for internal employees when you're a small and growing organization to see recognition from a large global partner or brand that says this is a great organization that we would like to partner with. So I'm probably over time, but thank you all for your time and for having me today. Head to 100.org to learn more, become an ambassador, submit your innovation, or just to connect with any of us. Thanks.
Excellent. So I'm just going to be a bit different now. I'm going to allow two people who've raised their hands to talk. Catherine Omubulu and Olujide Kuti. Can you make your questions extremely short and snappy? In the interim, while we're waiting for their questions, just that one question. Are they there? They're not talking. So my own question really was, have you found it easier to partner with larger organizations or smaller organizations?
Well, that's a great question. I think I would say it's harder to get that initial conversation with large organizations. So we've had to do more to get recognized, get in the door, maybe 3 to 4 to 6 month process of me working with their team, making sure we're aligned, that they understand the project, that, we tweak our terms and everything to fit what they want. So that's more difficult up front, but once the project is going, they generally have the resources and they're much more structured. And so it's actually relatively easy once you get it kicked off. Where smaller organizations are the opposite. They're much more willing to agree to our terms, to kind of take it at face value, and then get the contract over the line quickly. But they can be a little bit slower to get things going, actually do what they committed to, and then we kind of have to manage it a little bit more. So I'd say there's pros and cons to each.
I'm going to have lots of questions for you, but I'm going to have to fly out of Helsinki now to Kampala. I'm not sure what airline I'm going to use, or maybe I'm going to use Richard Branson's Galactica that is still in the making. So lots of questions. My questions to you will really be around Africa and really how to help scale up, and we are going to help probably work with you at some time together in doing that. But there are lots of innovations that are hungry for scale up. So we're just going to leave you, Danny, now. And we run to Kampala. And Frank, are you ready for us in Kampala?
Yes, please, I'm ready.
Please go on with you. So Frank, first of all, Frank,
yes, please.
Tell me about yourself in one sentence, if you can.
Oh, okay, thank you very much. First of all, I'm grateful to be here. I apologize, last time I wasn't able to attend. I had technical issues. I'm a secondary school teacher. I've taught for many years now. except that I've just joined public service. I teach IT and I have a passion for IT. And I'm very grateful. That's what I can say basically. I'm based in Kampala, and basically that's how I am basically.
Brilliant. So I'm going to let you go through your presentation, because today being the last of our 4-week seminar, we're going to webinar or seminar, same thing. I'm going to have lots of questions for you. But one question I want you to start thinking about is that if you're finding it difficult to join in a Zoom webinar, and you have
Yes.
technical issues, then I'm quite concerned how we believe e-learning can work for all across the continent. And that's something I'd like you to speak to perhaps at the end of your presentation. But I really want to give you the floor now and speak to it, speak to the issues, and good luck. Thank you.
Okay, please. Can you please share my presentation?
The back office is doing that. They're doing that.
Okay, please share the presentation. Is everybody seeing my screen now? Yeah, so basically, first of all, as I've introduced myself, I'm Chamsi Frank. Of course, I'm the Executive Secretary, Works Education Consult, and I'm a teacher. Well, I'll try to talk about my experiences of teaching. That too. Can you go to slide 2? Yeah, I'll talk about my experiences, basically to do with teaching in Africa, and maybe in East Africa. Now, the grassroots teaching in East Africa encompasses mainly 2 key factors. One, we have the high pupil-teacher ratios. We find that in most cases, it's 1 teacher to 80 pupils in class, and this is basically in urban areas, in Kampala and maybe in some other places. Then we have the issue of the overcrowded classrooms. So we always have that issue. The classrooms are overcrowded, especially in the private schools and in Kampala and maybe in urban areas. Now we also have the issue of the inadequate teaching facilities. We have the few computers, then the lab equipment facilities, and others. Now, basically, generally, the teaching in most of the East African schools is done or are done via the following methods. We basically have the culture and the tradition orientation methods. These methods always target the result-oriented teaching, where in most cases, the teachers target results for the final examinations. Like in Uganda, we basically have the national examinations for UNEB. You find that teachers teach with the aim of having students pass. Now we also have the project work. The project work, which is basically for a few subjects. We always have it like the entrepreneurship, the fine art, and the natural sciences, which are limited because of the theoretical approaches. Now, there's also some research-based work with limited internet use and the ill-equipped libraries, and also the group work. So generally, when you look at this first slide, the grassroots teaching in Africa is based with these tools. We have some of these tools. We find that in most urban-based families, they have an advantage over the rural-based families. And as a result, they're able to access learning through modern means. And some of these means, we have the TV or radio broadcast for literature, for subjects like literature, history, and political education. Then there are also those who are able to access the newspapers. They can access some resources. And then some can access educational pullouts with assignments, but basically for urban homesteads and a few rural affiliate. And then there's also limited use of computers. And some people, of course, are able to access the YouTube tutorials where e-learning is taking place, but mainly in urban schools, and also some of the libraries. And let's go to another slide. Let's move to another slide, please. Now, I try to look at the perspective of the profession post the pandemic, the global pandemic. I'm looking at a situation where our governments should advocate for adequate ICT infrastructure. The governments in South Africa and maybe all over Africa, they should advocate for the adequate ICT infrastructure. And then we need to have the inclusion of many participants in education with public, and this may be the public people, and then and other stakeholders, the donors, the ministry officials, private consultants and other teachers. Then we have to have the teaching of ICT as a subject. I know, for instance, in Uganda at the moment, ICT has been inculcated with the lower curriculum. And I hope even in Tanzania and Kenya, it is also taking respective of that. And then we need to inculcate virtual learning, and that is the only way to go if we are to have greater teaching in this post-global pandemic. Then you have, I don't know how best we're going to look at the COVID scare in classroom, social distancing, and then we need to also look at the number of students in class, the testing kits, the use of masks, the hand washing facilities. So we need to think about also these things if we are to have effective teaching and learning. And then we need to have the teachers in a way that they must relearn and they also must unlearn. And then also, I also looked at this situation where the teachers must accept that they are no longer the source of knowledge. Learning must be research-based. And we are able to do research through the use of ICT and other facilities. So let's move to the other slide, please. Now, we also looked at the issue of the restrictions. Oh, sorry, you've moved very fast. Yeah, yes, can you move to another slide? Oh, hello? Hello? Oh, are you getting me? Oh. Oh, no. Hello, I've lost you. Hello?
Frank, you can just speak on while your slides come on. Just keep talking about your experiences.
Yeah, so I was still talking about that the teachers, we need to inculcate them in a way that we must get methods and means of seeing that the teachers are educated to meet the current trends in the new dilemmas of teaching and assisting learners. So the collaboration and partnership we all look at, or that we want to go in, should look at looking at the teachers. How are we going to help them to improve their teaching after this pandemic or post the pandemic? And then the other thing I wanted to talk about, I'm not seeing my screen. Can you help me see my screen? Oh, sorry. Hello. I've lost you.
So just talk about, keep talking. When your screen comes on, just talk about your experiences in Kampala, what you're seeing. You're an ICT instructor. What sort of challenges are you seeing? You know, for instance, last week you're unable to dial in because there was a technical issue. Can you talk about those issues while your screen comes on? Thank you.
Okay. Well, basically in Kampala, and our teaching, basically we have a poor ICT infrastructure. We find challenges with the bandwidth issues. We have challenges with the data. The data is quite expensive. The ISPs are quite expensive, and always it's on and off. We have issues of low bandwidth. So we have that. Now, when we have these partnerships, yes, I'm glad my screen is on. If we have this partnership and collaboration, of course, they will help us to reduce the resource constraints, and we will have support in research on better ways to manage the impact of such a pandemic on education. And we are also looking at, I also looked at, it will improve the financial resources from the partnership that are created. We'll have better ways of accessing those financial resources. And then it will also improve and enhance access to assistive devices for children with special needs. And we shall also have an access to ICT facilities and tools that will help in digitalizing education materials and link library. And also I looked at this partnership and collaborations in helping training of teachers and the stakeholders. And then it will also assist in redefining the role of an educator. Our roles as educators post the pandemic, we need to see ways of redefining our roles in a way that we need to understand our basic and improving our learning. And then the collaboration will help us in support, in research on better ways to manage the impact of such a pandemic on education. So basically that's what I looked at, how this partnership and collaboration will help us. And then can we go to the next slide, please? Okay. Basically, that's what I had prepared. Thank you very much. Thanks.
I want to say thanks for such a, especially with having technical challenges, it must be difficult. But you know that question I sort of alluded to at the very beginning. How are you driving learning when you have technical problems and connectivity? How are we managing that out in, not just in Kampala, but perhaps the rural areas of Uganda?
Okay, thank you very much. Basically, what they have done, that they try to have these materials, suppose at times they're distributed through the CDs, that they work in most cases offline. You find that the education materials are saved on CDs and maybe on flash disks, and then they're distributed to those rural areas we don't have connectivity. And maybe in most cases in other rural areas, you find that they have used the solar panels to have a reliable electric power supply. That still also has challenges. And basically that's how they have managed, is basically to work with offline and then distributing them on ICT tools like the CDs and then the flash disks, basically that.
ICT is, what would you say the average Ugandan teacher is? Are they digitally literate? Do they know how to use computers? Or are you, as an ICT teacher, responsible for helping that transition for other subject matter teachers like maths, literacy, etc.?
Yeah, thanks for that question. Of course, it is true most of the teachers have that digital divide issue. They are not so much literate with ICT. They are not. You find that it is we who have the ICT skills that end up assisting them and organize some small workshops for them to start using the online tools and also the computers themselves with the softwares. So you find that the teacher, we the teachers of ICT are the ones who are helping to implement the use of ICT tools in schools, basically that.
Danny, could you come on at this stage? I just want to have a sort of Q&A between both of you. Could you? Yeah.
Sure.
So you've heard what he's spoken to, the issues of the average school teacher in the public sector, in the suburban, urban areas, and what same situation in the rural areas. I mean, we do have elitist private schools which don't have these issues he's enumerated at this point. So how would your organization or fellow organizations collaborate with such a teacher? So he's working in the public sector, he's got ideas. How do you think collaborations and partnerships could come together to solve those pertinent issues?
Yeah, it's a great question. And you know, what we're seeing a lot of is that obviously the rural challenges are just significantly different than those in areas with high connectivity. Not to say that, you know, high connectivity areas have all the problems solved, in the sense that there's still a lot of challenges with, you know, how teachers and parents should be using technology, you know, especially based on the age of the children. You know, how are they able to interact with the content and the curriculum that's being pushed out? But what a lot of, at least with our conversations with the World Bank and governments, it's about, you know, how do you make solutions that are equitable for all? So, you know, it's video classes on the one end, all the way to radio and SMS-based solutions with interactive components at the bottom end. So, you know, I'd say the advice for schools and teachers is to surface your challenges and through organizations like 100, and, you know, try to find innovations in your local areas on 100.org if you can find the internet access. And we're continuing to discover, research, and publish solutions for all different types of technological access and challenges throughout the world, but also share solutions with us when you're aware of them, because that's the only way we're going to help spread them faster.
At this point, I want to launch, one of the things that we did last week was, again, talk about teachers. And I believe I said that earlier, that people felt that teachers need to be inspired to bring about those changes in their classroom. There's been a lot of noise about technology, and what we're seeing is that you need a teacher to implement technology.
Yes.
So I think we've gone around in the midst of the pandemic and earlier that whatever it is you're implementing, whether it's policy, whether it's process, whether it's technology, we need human interaction to make learning outcomes realizable. So those interactions are primarily by the teachers in the classroom. And obviously outside the classroom, that's where the parents come in and are very handy in helping build that ecosystem of the learners of tomorrow. And as I always say, we're in Africa. Dear Madiba always talked about Ubuntu and the spirit of collaboration and togetherness. So we believe a village raises a child or a learner. It's not just about a teacher, a school, it's about that collaborative effort. So at this point, I'm just going to ask you guys to pause a bit. I'm going to launch some polls to see what your thoughts are about the teacher. May I ask Kayode to launch the polls now, please? So we launch the polls and then we'll take some other questions and we continue. There's a lady who has a question for you now while the polls are ongoing. Her name is Catherine. Catherine, I've unmuted you now. Could you make your question known to the panel and make it very short, please? Catherine. While we're waiting for Catherine to come on, one of the questions I've picked up from social media, there's a lot of interaction going on as we're having this conference because we have teachers who are online and can't join in, was like how do individuals connect with 100, for instance? So we said a lot about organizations, but there's a question about how do we have individuals connect with 100? Danny, could you address that question?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is the core of 100 really is our community. And so for individuals, whether it's a teacher or an organization or just a practice on the side or after school, anyone that feels they have an innovation worthy of the world knowing, you're very welcome to create an innovation page. Anyone can create one for free. It automatically gets reviewed by our research team. And then for ambassadors, this is really anyone who is passionate about education, believes innovation is the path to changing education. Anyone can apply on our website, and we're always looking for more ambassadors everywhere in the world to both share innovations from their region or their local area that they hear about, but also distribute innovations from the Global 100 and share solutions and help recommend them in their local areas. Oh, you're still on mute, honey.
I'm going to ask you the tough question now. Tough question.
Go ahead.
You're doing work in North America, in Canada, Latin America, Europe, Asia, and in Africa, you've only done Ethiopia, South Africa, Ghana, and Morocco, right?
Nigeria.
You've done Nigeria. So yeah. 4 countries. 4 projects, 4 countries, per the map you shared.
Those aren't projects. So those are innovations that have been submitted. So we've selected global innovations, innovations to our global collection from those 4 countries. We've received innovations from 24 countries in Africa, and we have ambassadors in 14 countries. We tried to get a project going in Nigeria, actually, at the end of last year, but while we were fundraising, COVID hit. So unfortunately, that might be on hold right now, but very interested in more projects in Africa and helping as much as we can.
And that shows the impact of things like COVID. So another question I'm going to throw at you is, how are funders reacting in COVID? Are funders, from your experience of partnerships, are you seeing more funders wanting to throw a huge amount of dollars at pipeline projects? Or is everybody in this, let's just wait?
Yeah, it's a great question. What we're seeing is a real mix. So you've got organizations that are very forward thinking and problem solving. They're trying to react and quickly deploy resources. Unfortunately, a lot of the time, unfortunately for education, a lot of the time, the initial reaction is really on the health side and the economy, and education seems to be sort of the third thing that's thought of, and unfortunately, in some cases, seen as the path towards economic recovery. So how can we just get kids back in school fast enough to get, people working from home so that they're back to full productivity? So I'm worried that in a lot of places it really is seen as the third wheel. But I know there are still organizations, both in specific countries and some global ones, that are interested in solving educational challenges, because the disparity in equity right now is so high that it's a really obvious issue, and is also driving a lot more issues, not just today, but for these generations to come and later in their lives. So we're seeing a mix, but it's really, it's a matter of honestly contacting as many as possible. And I've reached out to maybe 15 funders that I've been in some contact with before and gotten pretty low response rates. So some of them are just retreating and ignoring, and others are being very proactive, and we're discussing how to tackle these challenges together. So
the other thing that you hadn't touched on, and I think maybe you should touch on, because I have a previous life in banking, so one banking, I was sit in London, is a lot of times projects come, but they're not well packaged.
Yep.
And they're very good ideas, but they're not well packaged. And more so in education, people don't, like I said, the business of education is not well understood. So maybe on the funder side, they can't see how they'll get their ROI, except as an impact investment. What are your thoughts? And have you had, without you being sharing more than what is publicly available, how have you circumvented those issues or helped repackage a deal to make it happen because it wasn't well packaged, or because the inventor, innovator, or the entrepreneur didn't have those skills set? How has 100 helped?
Yeah, it's a great question, and something that we run into very commonly, because as you said, it's I think it is a skill set to be able to package and market and really sell your idea, whether it's on paper or in person or what have you. And most of the time, these folks, whether they're teachers or leading small organization, they've been focusing on making change happen at their scale and with their students, parents, teachers, whoever they work with. And so this, how to package and sell it, is not top of mind for them. And so they're usually just putting forth kind of like the basics, or just, very kind of simple summary of what they do, and not tying that together with a narrative or the impact. And so what we end up doing is, when we see these innovation pages that are created, first, even just having that format is actually one of the most helpful things that I've seen, even just comparing, a simple website created by an innovator versus what they're able to put into an innovation page on 100. It's much more clear. It shows the impact very clearly, that target age group, what country they're in, where they've expanded, how many children impacted. So even that we find to be a really helpful summary of the innovation and the impact that it has. But then on top of that, for specific spotlights, where there are innovators where we've either spoken with them or we've been connected with them, we have some connection, we know what they really do, we've heard them explain it, but it's not coming through in the page. We work with them to package it a little bit more clearly before it's considered for these spotlights. Sorry, you're muted again.
So Frank, I've just unmuted you. I want you to talk to Danny. Where, if you had needs in Uganda, so I'm putting you here as a spotlight, where would you want Danny to help you out, and how can he help you out? Can you guys engage? We want you to talk here. We're not saying it's going to happen, but we want to talk to him about your problem. You mentioned special needs, vulnerable learners, particularly special kids with special needs are often left behind. Is that somewhere of collaboration? Can you tell Danny, present your case to him? Frank?
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, we've had a challenge that the special needs children are not helped, or where they are helped, there is it's limited. You find that much as for us, we're using our skills to teach them, for them, they don't have these other gadgets. So I don't know if Dan can help, or we can collaborate in a way that he can provide some ICT facilities that could help the children, especially those with special needs, because they are less advantaged. the less privileged in my country here. I don't know, could be even in Tanzania and even in Kenya. And even the other ways, how can he help us have more research, do more research work on ground to better the teachers? Because the fact is the teachers have less skills in use of the ICT, very many of them, and there is need to revamp the teaching. They need to inculcate the new teaching methods, need the ICT integration. So I don't know, can Danny throw more light how we can help?
So before we ask Danny that question, I'm just going to come in and moderate. So Danny is representing one of many hundreds of organizations that are out there that are looking for projects. So we're not necessarily saying that it's going to be Danny or 100, but they all follow a particular methodology to identify projects. They all follow a particular methodology for international collaboration. So the question, I'll summarize and paraphrase to Danny. If you were a potential, middleman, agent, funder, collaborator, how would you address that issue he's got there? And how would you want him to go about it?
If I was a funder or
a consultant, a funder, 100, how would you go about what the issue is just narrated?
Yeah, well, I mean, from my perspective, my initial reaction is, we have many special needs solutions that we've identified from around the world. Some are technological based, and one of our favorite innovators from last year was actually a special needs app out of Turkey. So that's on the more technological side, but there's obviously a lot of offline solutions around the world as well. And we've heard the same thing, Frank, that special needs right now is one of the biggest challenges. Obviously most parents aren't really well equipped for it. And a lot of teachers, to your point, are not even up to date on the latest methods. So I think the first thing that I would say is, we're happy to share a bunch of suggested solutions, possible things to learn from around the world. And if there's any particular interest or one that you would like to speak with directly, we play that middleman role. We run that community and we have direct access to all these folks that are happy to help, or at least, take a phone call and explain what they do, especially around the teacher training component, because what we've seen is even, the best idea or the perfect solution for a student, if the teachers aren't brought on board, if they're not trained in depth on the specific intervention, it doesn't much matter. And so I think what we would do is try to connect you with the right folks that can help solve the challenge, because we as 100 are a relatively small 8-person organization in Finland, but the power is in the community that are also eager to become recognized and to work with each other to help solve these challenges globally.
Yeah, so I'm going to add to that. So what is most important is let's start building our projects properly, and let's pilot before we scale. Let's start to get data for what the pilot, because these are all things that makes the project stand out. So like what you said about learning children with learning aids, for instance, in Uganda, perhaps you could start piloting with 2-3 kids, or 4, 5, 10, 20, and then let's see how that is driving learning outcomes. It's measurable. And then, you can approach organizations internationally. And we have a lot of organizations locally. I mean, in Nigeria, Dangote Foundation does a lot. There are a lot of Defeat Ford Foundation projects. And one of the things we're going to be doing post this conference is kind of create a compendium that people can know where to go to, because I think it's about collaboration. But Catherine, are you available to ask your question now? I've unmuted you. Catherine and Ojide Kuti. Okay.
Oh.
Make it very brief. Can I have your questions real quick to the panel?
No, I'm not asking a question.
Okay. She didn't seem ready there. So we've just about finished the polls. I'm going to share the result. We've had launched quite a few polls. I'm going to end the poll about reshaping education in Africa, so I can share with you how we are helping to get that conversation going. I'm just going to end the poll now. We've had about 81% vote. So the first question was one, what do you think is the single most important thing for African teachers post the COVID-19 global pandemic? And what we see here is 73% think it's continuous professional development, that's CPD. And, you know, and for me, this is so exciting because yes, we're a firm that does CPD, but sometimes and many times we think we know what people need and we don't realize it. You know, there's been a lot of conversation about inspiration, professionalism, which is excellent and which is important, but we're seeing the polls suggest that CPD is actually what this sample group of attendees are connecting with. The second question was, will an award recognizing exceptional and innovative teachers across Africa inspire other teachers to be more creative and more passionate about their jobs? 44% would strongly agree with that, and 38% agree. Only 13% were undecided, 4% disagree, and 1% strongly disagree. So we see that, again, awards are a way to sort of build performance measurement and kind of reward, sort of incentivize. It's something that could work. In Nigeria, we have the Maltina Teacher of the Year Award, which has been well received since introduction about 5 years ago. The third question was, where can the private sector play and increase interventions in harnessing the potential of teachers post-COVID-19? And it looks at the attendees of this conference feel that a large area would be in digital training. Provision of digital training is one area the private sector can help drive the post, COVID-19 African teacher. The other area, which, accreditation and certification only attracted 6%. Also, corporate social investment, 40% alluded to that. That would be a very good way of driving potential of teachers. So if we look at that, we're seeing corporate social investment, which is something which is very much embedded in SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. We see digital literacy and training very critical, and that's where we believe a lot of private partnership is needed and private sector provision. We see that people believe an award is very necessary. It will incentivize teachers to perform better in their jobs. And we see that continuous professional development is extremely important from what the poll contributors have put down. So thank you for that poll. I want to throw the question to Frank. Frank, was that poll, Frank, yeah, was that poll anything of like what you were expecting?
The provision of the digital training.
Yes.
Yeah, the provision of digital training, and then the professional continuous development. That's basically what I was expecting, that if we can have that, then we will have a change in the mindset of our teachers, of my fellow teachers, and maybe also across Africa. That's what I expected, definitely. Thanks. Hello, I've lost you.
Yep. So Danny, would it be the same thing for you? Did you, the answers you got from the polls, did you get anything jumping at you, or was it really what you expected?
No, I find it to be really interesting that, teacher training seems to be such a high priority for everyone. I mean, it really speaks to the challenges, I think, probably before COVID as well, but especially during, all of these new technologies. And we hear this in in developed or highly internet-enabled countries as well, like Finland, where the younger teachers are just spending extra time helping the older teachers, the ones less comfortable with technology, how to use it, how to work with their students. And so they're getting this sort of informal training along the way from the younger teachers. But if you don't have that local expertise, or you have additional challenges there, it can be really difficult. And that's also just the basic usage of technology, let alone how to actually deploy it in an effective way. And that is something that I don't even know, that we really have a lot of answers and expertise on, is what's really working right now. What is the right combination of teachers, parents, and students interacting with technology and the curriculum in different ways to maximize learning? I think that's something that it may take months to actually understand what worked and what didn't.
So if I've just taken what you've said, CPD, continued professional development, but from what you're seeing in developed countries, which is, miles apart, really, Finland and South Korea are really up there, is coaching and mentoring is very important. So that training must have a coaching and mentoring element. And we think that we believe private sector can provide that, and we believe that we can collaborate more and through corporate social investments. At this point, I'm going to share with you what Axiom has come up with. I mean, over the last 3 weeks and 4 weeks now, I think we've had a lot of conversations. We've had 1,300 plus participants at our 4 webinars, and they have represented people from policy, government, quite a wide plethora. We've had ministers on the call. We've had registrar generals of Teachers Union. We've had learners. We've had teachers. And we thought, we think really it's about the teacher. So I want to share with you our own solution for everybody. Can I have the screen come up now? My screen. Can I have the screen? Could you please share my screen now? We're launching something. I'm waiting for it to come on board first before I tell you what it is. We're not giving $300 billion out to the world, don't worry. I wish.
You may be able to share it yourself, actually.
I might be. No, I think the gentleman is doing it from the back end. Yeah, he's doing it now. So we decided to launch a post-COVID challenge. And, the conference is called Reshaping Education in Africa 2020. So we've launched a challenge today. And I'll tell you more. Next slide, please, Shegun. The challenge is one that must imbibe the spirit of collaboration. So we did not come up with a challenge where we've already sort of defined all the parameters. We feel that we all now on this call, and more people that will join over the next 6 weeks, will help flesh out that challenge. And it's really for teachers. We want to celebrate the post-COVID African teacher. Can I have the next slide now? That shows the life cycle. So in essence, we will launch today. The website is available there. And we encourage people to go in and share their feedback, how you feel an award or a challenge or a competition should look like. And then at the end of, so you've seen it there. Stage 1 is a collaborative design thinking, where we will accept feedback from everybody. The competition is for Africa, but we'll accept feedback from everywhere. So Danny, you're more than welcome to give feedback on what you think a competition should look like. So on the 1st of July, and this will run until the 30th of June, you can send your feedback, just fill out. And on the 1st of July, the competition will launch. It will launch for 2 months. During that time, we would want African teachers to share innovative solutions. We feel going forward, one of the things needed is critical thinking, a lot of co-creation skills, collaboration in the classroom, effective communication. So they're welcome, whether you're tech, whether you're a teacher and anywhere, the criteria will come out of that design thinking phase. You submit your solution, and then there'll be a panel from the 1st of September for a month, the whole of September, that will evaluate the entries, and then the winner will be announced on World Teachers Day on the 5th of October. We feel this is our own token to to add a voice to the conversation. Partners are welcome to join in, lots of feedback all through that design thinking stage in order for us to flesh out what a competition should look like. I think at this junction, I will say thank you to the two panelists. It's time now to have contributions and questions. Unfortunately, Lloyd is having a problem dialing back into Zentalk. She's come in a few times and she's flown, she didn't come through. Someone Josiah Jibwe raised a hand. I'm going to take a question from you. Dotun said, what is the prize? It's a collaborative design thinking. So during the collaborative phase, you are more than welcome to tell us how you think a prize should look like, what you think it should contain, who is eligible. That's why we're here. We're here to work together. So I'm going to ask Josiah, who raised his hand, to please ask his question. You've got the floor. Josiah Ajibwe. Josiah, Professor Josiah.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon to you.
Yeah, once again, it's my pleasure to be here this afternoon for this conference. It's been an eye-opener again, and I think it's highly rewarding. Yes, I think post-COVID-19, definitely we are going to be talking about so many things as affects the teacher, especially with regards to collaboration and partnership. And I think the idea that Axiom is launching is a very welcome development in terms of partnership. It's very glaring from the polls that was taken earlier on that teachers will actually require a lot of digital literacy training, because post-COVID-19 education will no longer be business as usual, where the teacher will be seen as a sage on the stage. Definitely, we are going to begin to see teachers in a new perspective. They will now become facilitators of learning, and they will need a lot of digital capacity. And that's why we feel very strongly that the mandatory continuing professional development program, and especially with regards to digital literacy training, will be a very strong thing that will help African teachers to move forward post-COVID-19. And I'm very glad that even the generality of the participants on the of a partnership would be required because look, the pandemic has really brought the reality that look, we are looking at global reality. Yes, a global challenge, and we need cooperation of everybody. The children are now going to realize that we are going to come to the realization that we are preparing our children as global citizens, and this, as a global pandemic, we have to tackle this together. And now see our children, how do we prepare these children for the world? And I think Africa will have to come in very strongly in this regard, because we have been lagging behind over the years. And I believe very strongly that, look, we need a lot of collaboration with the parents, with the communities, because it's glaring that the teachers can no longer do it alone. Because, look, the four walls of the classroom will not just be where the children are going to be learning all the time. They will also be learning from home and from every other. So we need community participation, we need parents' commitment and participation, and we need the participation of everybody to make sure that we drive learning after COVID-19, post-COVID-19. And so I agree, and I think I really appreciate the conclusion that, look, you are coming up with a program. Yes, very recently, the African Union introduced a competition among teachers in Africa. It's just been introduced. We had the first edition last year, where teachers compete, and yes, so we just had that. It's tailored after what you call the Global Teachers Prize. If you know what I mean, we have the Global Teachers Prize. The Africa AU one is also tailored after that. We are looking forward to this, your new initiative, which we believe that our teachers will be glad to participate in. Once again, I really appreciate the panelists and the moderator. We're glad to be here. Thank you very much. The Teachers Regional Council of Nigeria will also be glad to be part of the partnership that we drive post-COVID-19 education in Africa. We are a member of the African Federation of Teaching Regulatory Authorities, and also a member of the International Forum of Teaching Regulatory Authorities. And so we'll be glad to be part of any global drive to move education forward post-COVID-19. Once again, thank you very much.
Josiah, you didn't explain who you were. You didn't explain who you were.
Well, thank you very much. I am Professor Josiah Ajiboye, the Registrar Chief Executive of the Teachers Registration Council of Nigeria. The Teachers Registration Council of Nigeria is the teacher regulatory body, is the regulatory authority for teaching profession in Nigeria. And like I said, we're a member of AFTRA, the African Federation of Teaching Regulatory Authorities, and a member of the International Forum of Teaching Regulatory Authorities. Thank you very much.
Josiah, I wanted to ask you, how many teachers do we have in Nigeria? Could you tell the panel and the audience, how many teachers do you know we have in Nigeria?
Yeah, presently, as to say the number that are so far registered with TRCN, we have over 2,200,000 teachers that have registered so far with the Teachers Registration Council of Nigeria. But we know that we have about 4 million, close to 4 million teachers in Nigeria presently. But a large number of them, especially those who are in private schools, have not registered. Whereas about 83% of the teachers in public schools have registered with the Teachers Registration Council of Nigeria. Just about 40% of teachers in private schools have done so. And that was why we gave a deadline of December 31st last year. And we're trying to monitor now to ensure compliance among all the teachers in the country. For anyone who wants to profit from the profession of a teacher must be qualified, registered, and licensed by the regulatory authority. Thank you.
Thank you. Josiah has shared shows that one of the collaborations within the sector in Africa should really be at the teacher level, whether it's incentives through awards, whether it's training, whether it's corporate social investment. That's really one area to be going, because once we empower the teacher, then they can create these things that we want to see in the classroom. I have a question from Kemi Ayodele. Kemi, go ahead and ask your question. Make it short because we'll start rounding up soon.
Thank you very much. I would like to appreciate the organizers of this webinar. I think it's a welcome development. And going through what I've heard from the two major speakers this afternoon, I want to say that we are starting very early, which is very unusual. We are looking at the post-COVID-19. So we are starting very early. That means that we are going to get there. And I'm looking at it that at the end of it all, at the end of this COVID-19, taking Nigeria as a case study, that we'll be able to look inward into e-learning. Because as at this moment, all of the students, the pupils, everybody's at home. But if we have adopted e-learning, this will not be the case. If we have adopted digital learning and so on, this wouldn't have been the case. So I'm looking at Africa, looking at the use of e-learning in situations like this. And if we start now after the COVID-19 and build into the future so that what we are experiencing now in Africa will not be the case in future occurrence where we have this type of pandemic. Thank you. I actually enjoyed this webinar.
So, Danny and Frank, do you have questions? Do you want to share maybe just a reaction to the last two before we start rounding up?
Yeah, the one thing I'll say, I mean, one of the big conversations we're having is how do we take the learnings from this and apply them going forward, not just to be prepared for the next crisis, whatever it may be, but also to apply these learnings to business as usual schooling, and how do we involve parents and students at home, or just parents more deeply in their children's learning process, and how can we integrate those more tightly going forward. So I think one of our goals is to try to consolidate those and combine the learnings and create some recommendations for how school systems can improve going forward and improve learning outcomes, whether it's e-learning solutions, incorporating technology into the learning process, inside and outside the classroom.
So what about you, Frank?
Well, thank you. Maybe what I would encourage or ask Axiom is to get better ways of even reaching those teachers who are far away in those rural areas. Because in most cases, when we talk about technology, we are aware of the digital divide. Now, there must be also practical solutions, practical mechanisms and methods of how also to reach those people who are far away from towns. That's what maybe I would encourage, that's what I would ask, that as we look at the post-COVID-19, we need to see what ways we're going to help also those teachers who are far away. And maybe even the last one is, we continue with this collaboration. We don't stop at all at this conference, as you've suggested with the competition you've launched. We will look at also other ways on how we continue the collaboration. It may not need a lot of money, but how are we prepared also to embrace it? How are we prepared to embrace it as the teachers? Yeah, basically, thank you.
Yeah, so thank you very much for that. So I'll answer the question about the digital divide. It's something that came up on the second week of the webinar. And it's very important that in adopting technology, we don't create another problem of equity in education. And this is not just something that is peculiar to Africa, it's peculiar in European cities, where even parents have one PCs in the house and they're working at home, mother, father, children. I mean, who really gets the computer to work on when children are supposed to be doing e-learning? And you'd find also in Europe, in particularly in places like United Kingdom and Northern Ireland, as well as Republic of Ireland, the schools that are private schools, the elite schools, are doing far ahead. They've got better connected systems than public sector. Well, I think with radio, if we can start looking at solutions around radio is a very cheap, simple tool. If we start looking at how we have add-ons on radio that enable that two-way feedback. So for instance, you have a radio show and then people can dial in or send things on WhatsApp. You're still creating that collaborative learning. So I think it's something that we should, and perhaps the teachers that will go into the competition should start looking at those things. I think we need to be collaborative. We're creating the environment for that. We're going to work with regulators and partners, and I think it's open for everyone to add to the conversation. I see a hand from Mrs. Buki Adebonoju. Can you quickly share? Before you quickly share, sorry, I want to say one thing else. I've seen a lot of questions about where the webinars, the recordings and all that. Everything is going to be available on our YouTube channel that will be shared right after this conference. I still feel that people are concerned about how to scale up, how to partner, collaborate. So I'm going to throw this at you, Danny, a challenge, if you're ready for one, that both of us put a paper together, since I have a former investment banking background and you have a lot of strong partnership background. We could put a paper together, a newsletter that would just, in very simple terms, just tell people how to connect, to collaborate, etc. It doesn't have to be with 100. It could be connecting internationally, nationally, and at the community level. But let's take that. Are you up for that challenge?
Definitely. Yeah.
Put your hand up. I'm putting my hand up. So we will both do a paper that addresses partnerships, engagement, and collaboration, and then circulate that through the 100 networks as well as the Axiom network. On that note, I'm going to have one last question from Olubukola Adebonoju that I'm going to hand over to our wonderful compare, Valentine. Buki.
Hello, everyone. Again, my name is Buki Adebonoju from Lagos, Nigeria. I'm not sure if it's actually a question, it's more of a comment, and to also stress the fact that I think that we need to, the government has they have a huge role to play here. I think, we in Africa, we lack a pandemic readiness policy. I think that is key to post-COVID, that we need to have that done. And in putting that pandemic readiness policy together, we also have to go back and look at our investments in education as a government, and the government is responsible to ensure that they provide education to their citizens. I think they need to start to increase their budgets in education. We need to start looking at, in order to close the gap here. Everybody's talking about virtual learning, technology, and all of that. Of course, it's important. We have to find realistic solutions that are sustainable and realistic for our own environment. And I know in other countries, the reason why it was so easy and quick and they could easily revert to remote learning and virtual learning was because they have, even embedded in government institutions, they also have departments that deal with that. We need to start aligning our curriculum to be online ready. It has to be able to be deployed to virtual learning platforms, be it radio, be it using the internet, WhatsApp, phone, whatever it is. We need to first of all understand what we have in Nigeria, what we have in Africa, what is sustainable, what can be sustainable. And then we need to make sure that in getting that pandemic readiness policy together, the government also needs to invest. They need to put their money where their mouth is. They need to put money into education, and they need to start looking at those gaps and filling them with, filling the gaps as well. So aligning that curriculum to be easily deployed on virtual platforms is key. And we also need to partner with teachers who are really the ones in the trenches, that they understand the issues, whether it's in the urban areas or in the rural areas. They have the data, they understand what's going on. We need to be able to collaborate with teachers, other stakeholders, people, donor agencies, whatever it is. But we need to tell ourselves the truth in Africa, that our government needs to also start to look at the fact that we are lagging behind, the gap is getting larger, and they need to start investing in education, and we need to do it now. Thank you very much.
To start winding down. So I just noticed the question that in Africa, it seems most of the training of teachers, particularly I think this person alluded to Nigeria, was done by government, public sector, and religious institutions. That's not correct. There are private institutions that do offer pre-service training that is certified and accredited. And then there are also private sector organizations like Axiom that focus on delivering continuing professional development for teachers. We've trained 20,000 teachers in the last 10 years since our inception, and we will continue to do so in the digital arena. At this junction, I know the conversations are very interesting, but we really have to end these 4 weeks of webinars. It's been tiring, it's been whatever, but it's been wonderful having a very intellectual discourse. We've had, like I said, 1,300 participants from the US, from Greece, from the United Kingdom, from Ireland, from Germany, from France, from Spain, from Italy, and we've had from Canada, a speaker last week, ministers of education, a few have joined in on the call. So it's been really rich, and I think our star panelist was a learner from Khartoum, Karim Abdul Karim, who had been through a previous period last year when there was the Sudan uprising, and he didn't have, he didn't, it wasn't a global pandemic, but they were unable to go to school, and he was able to share his experiences with this time when it's been a global thing. And one of the things he said was that he's found the time to join free online courses offered by Harvard, Wharton, etc. He's also found at the time that learners need to collaborate, teachers, as in his words, need to collaborate with learners. So ladies and gentlemen, it's been an absolute delight having you share, and I think we should have more of this. One of the UN sub-agencies have reached out to us about creating this on a more regular forum. I think it's too much if we continue webinars every week, but it's been 4 weeks. And I think let's focus about collaborating. Let's focus about partnering. Let's focus about community-led engagement. A lot of people are doing wonderful things at Grassroots Tanzania. I saw that here on the call. I've got Onu here who joined in from Abidjan to share some of his experiences in setting up a TVET academy right in the heart of Abidjan with vulnerable children. So beautiful things are happening all around Africa. But what we need now is to bring the connections and to scale up. We must scale up. We really must scale up because the issues are everywhere. It's only places like Finland, South Korea that don't have this problem. There's problems in the UK, in the United States, they're everywhere. So it's time for us to reveal that. And on that note, I'm going to hand over to Valentine. Please share the competition slide. A lot of people are asking about it, so they know where to go. And don't just keep it to yourself. Spread the word. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure having you guys on board. I've been told that I should go into public broadcasting and public speaking. Maybe I should. I speak, but I don't broadcast. So thank you.
Annie, I think I agree with that. I think you should go into public broadcasting. You make a lot of money there. And thank you, everyone. Thank you for sharing this moment with us. Thank you for being part of that. For everybody who actually joined from the first parts, when we started this whole experience, learning experience, disruption and innovation, reshaping education in Africa post-COVID-19. You recall we started, the first part was on policy and leadership. The second part was on technology and innovation. The third part was on teaching and learning. And this final concluding session, part 4, partnerships, collaborations, and community engagements. The conversation doesn't end here, like Mr. Annie said. We're going to continue talking about these things. We're going to be having these conversations as we go along. Rightly said, Madam Bukola joined and said, it's a good thing we're starting now. Some other people even contributed to say it's a good thing we're starting now, because one of the best ways to refocus or re-strategize, reposition ourselves in Africa for the future that's already started now, is to prepare now ahead of what's going to come. Once the whole lockdown and everything is lifted, things are going to change. The world has already changed. Special thanks to our panelists. Without you, I think we'll probably just be staring at each other and asking questions, pointless questions, but you've directed us and you've given us the required knowledge to move ahead. Danny Galland, it's been a pleasure listening to you talk and watching the slides. Danny is the head of growth at 100, and fantastic work you're doing at 100, where you manage new and existing partnerships with companies, organizations. And I see many questions that were coming in as we were talking. People are asking for your contact details, and I'm sure the team will share them with everybody after this conference. Danny is one passionate person, passionate about education. He's been passionate since he was a student, and he continues to work. He's gone full-time, full stream on this from last year, talking about promoting education through tech, also bringing to bear the wealth of experience he gathered from San Francisco. So Danny is one person to always be in touch with. And then also thanking Mr. Frank. Mr. Frank, I really want to learn how to pronounce your surname. When you were talking, I noted you said Lukshiamuzi, if I got that right.
Okay, it is Luchamuzi.
Lukshiamuzi. Okay,
Yes.
all right.
Thanks.
Well, I know it rings well. I mean, I just pronounced it with like a novice, but Lukshiamuzi. He has 29 years experience. You look at his face, probably not even guess that he has more than 10, but he has 29 years teaching experience in Uganda, and also currently the executive secretary of the Wakiso Education Consult in Kampala, Uganda. Unfortunately, we couldn't have Lloydie. If she joined at any point, I must have missed her, a teacher of profession. I'm sure we'll connect with her soon. And also especially thanking Annie Charles Basieyo. When he said tired is an understatement, because I know what he and his team has been doing in the background, getting all the materials ready, making sure that every I is dotted and T is crossed, just to make sure these presentations are seamless. Annie is a fellow chartered accountant, and he's a certified corporate treasurer. Amongst other things, currently an active entrepreneur and a co-founder of Axiom Learning Solutions, and currently the principal and board executive of Lani Group, comprises of investment holdings. I'll go straight to thank again and again and again Rebecca Stromeyer for making sure that she's been very resourceful, really putting all the resources together, making sure that Axiom Learning, starts off on a very strong pedestal, making sure that, all the resources they need, they're not lacking. Rebecca Stromeyer is of eLearning Africa. She's also the founder of eLearning Africa. They've been very supportive in making this a success. And I want to especially thank other partners. I'm talking about MTN Nigeria and the fellows from Ghana, I'm talking about, wait, where are they? Yes, I'm talking about Africa Education Watch. I kept my notes on them. Special thanks to all of you, and especially to you, the participants, for being part of this event. And I want you to continue the conversation with Axiom Learning. Go on social media. Let's not stop here. It's not just all talk. It's about our time. It's about our future. It's about learning and education in Africa. Follow Axiom Learn NG. Axiom, AXIOM, Learn NG on social media. The materials, the videos, the recordings that you've been asking for will be provided immediately after this conference. So special thanks to you. My name is Valentine Ohu. I'm always on radio with you. And like Annie said, I took it as a personal challenge. We would carry on this education and further this conversation on radio. Bye, everyone.